Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dinah Labrizzi, IEEE USA staff, and I will be assisting with today's webinar. Before we get started, I have two housekeeping rules I would like to go over with you. First, please look to the top right-hand corner of your screen. You will see an icon that says Chat. Please click that icon now. You will see that the icon has turned blue, and a chat box has popped up in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. You will use this chat pod to submit your questions to the speaker. You can submit your questions anytime during the webinar, and the speaker will address your questions at the end of her remarks. Second, if you have to attend to other business, such as phone calls or other in-person conversations, please disconnect from the webinar to address it and reconnect to the webinar once your other business has concluded. Those are the housekeeping rules. Our speaker today is Nancy Martin. For more than 30 years, Nancy has worked for GE and held management positions primarily in engineering and research. She currently works at GE's Global Research Center in Niskayuna, New York, where she leads technical education for the company, including the Edison Engineering Program. GE is a high-tech company with over 55,000 technologists. Nancy graduated from Clarkson University with a mathematics degree and from Syracuse University with a master's degree in electrical engineering. Nancy is married with 2 children and enjoys speaking on topics like work-life balance, self-confidence, perfectionism, and finding career passion. I will now turn this over to Nancy.
Thank you very much, Diana. So this is Nancy Martin, and I had the pleasure of meeting some of you in New Orleans last summer, I believe, when I talked a little bit about imperfection. And so I did get quite a few follow-up emails and notes on it. So what we're going to do today is I'm still going to introduce it in the same way, so those of you that didn't hear it, you can figure out what I'm talking about when it comes to the advantages of imperfection. But I'm going to go into it with a little bit more detail and then leave more time for questions and answers so that we can kind of figure out if you feel like you're having issues, we can go through with that. So let me start with kind of describing, how do we get to be perfect? And of course, I'm talking to the IEEE people, so I'm guessing that quite a few of you might feel like you're trying to be perfect. So if you think about how it starts, when you're really little, like I was, you come home from maybe kindergarten and you bring home your first math test and you got 100, and your parents are really happy, and so, they put it onto the refrigerator and they say good job and it feels really good. And then you have your first spelling test, in my case, and I'm not a great speller, so I bring home my test and maybe I get a 60, still expecting my parents to be proud of me, but they're not really that proud, and it doesn't go in the refrigerator, and for all I know, it ends up in the garbage. So I start to think, hey, it feels better when I get 100 than it does when I don't. And there's certainly 2 different paths you can take in that type of scenario. One, you can just give up, but many of us then persevere and say, well, how do I feel this way all the time? And then it progresses, of course, because we're continuing to go to school. So in junior high, we're trying to get high grades so that we can, in high school, we can go into honors classes and AP classes. And then we try to get good grades there so we can get into the college of our choice, and maybe not even the college that fits, but the college that will impress people. And then we have to do really well in college, and because that way we can get a great job. And then you get a job. And that's where it starts to fall apart a little bit. And we all know what perfection means, right? If you get 100 on a test, you're perfect, and if you don't, you don't. So it's extremely easy to measure. But of course, when you become an adult, that is a little bit different. So you're now at work, and I always say no one's career is ever made by taking a test at the end of the year. So you're judged by different people, and that have different set of values, that value things that you do differently. So you could, one person could say, you're doing a fantastic job, while the other person feels like, you're just not quite good enough. And if you kind of start to know that you're a perfectionist when you start spending more and more time at work. And it's not necessarily because people are telling you to spend more time at work. It's just because you don't want to, you know, I hear people say, I don't want to let them down, or I want to make sure I do a good job. And before you know it, it spirals a little bit out of control. And then, as again, out of college, you know, in college you're really responsible for your grades and not much more, maybe your laundry. But when you become an adult, you can get into all kinds of traps for perfectionism. So it widens. It's not just, you know, your grades and your job, but you can even get, you know, what's the perfect car or the perfect lawn or the perfect children. And before you know it, it really does spiral. And there aren't enough hours in a day for you to do everything perfectly. And eventually it can collide, right, with the realities of time, of family, what other people expect of you. So that's kind of the path. And some of you are maybe midway through that. Maybe some of you are feeling the extreme pressures that perfectionism has led. Actually, some of you are probably sitting there thinking that you're not perfectionists. Perfectionists usually tell me, well, I'm not perfect yet. But perfectionism isn't being perfect. It's the pursuit of perfection. So some of you are even trying to figure out if that's where you are. So, of course, there is value in perfection, so I have to try to convince you that while this served you well for a while, it may not serve you well going forward. And I think it seems obvious because, you know, maybe you'll be able to sleep better, or, you know, you could sit still and watch an entire movie without checking your phone or seeing if there's another email or seeing if there's something else from work, or even not bringing your phone to dinner or thinking about work. So, you know, imagine a life where you really, you know, good was good enough, and you could, you know, you didn't have to spend time doing things that didn't matter. You know, a good example is when you're working on a presentation, very little time should be spent on slide making, I guess, which is obvious here for me, but, you know, what you want to work on is practicing what you want to say and the content. So that's what's really, truly important. You wouldn't expect everyone else around you to be perfect, but of course one of the downsides of being a perfectionist is you can then start to get disappointed that other people don't have the same work ethic as you, and it can actually be very difficult to be around perfectionists. So you can start to try to evaluate, hey, you know, am I impacting other people and in their lives as well? So why do we continue? Well, I think, you know, first and foremost, it's easy, and it's habit. I think there's a fear, you know, what happens if we aren't perfect? You know, what happens there? So I want to talk a little bit about some of the reasons why we might continue. So let's start a little bit with external voices. So these are people that say things sometimes casually, sometimes mean-spiritedly. Sometimes they say it with really good intentions, but these are things that stick with you. So examples are, I remember riding home on the bus in junior high, and out of nowhere, somebody told me I had a big nose. And so, you know, I went home and I looked at my nose and I examined it. It didn't appear to be big, but I now knew that somebody in the world did think it was. And so I walked around self-consciously, I think for a year, and would go around like kind of covering my nose when I spoke. So it was something, it was a label that somebody else gave me that was a stranger. I still to this day don't know who said that, but, and maybe it wasn't even to me, it could have been the person behind me on the bus, but for me, it was a label that I accepted. And then, you know, it can have, you know, deeper issues. I remember what my high school boyfriend called me fat sometime, you know, and so at some point I said, okay, well, maybe I'm fat, and that caused a lot of body image issues for years. I mean, that didn't go away for a long time. And so we all can have, and these can be good too, you know, you can, you know, in your family, you could be the smart one, and so you're walking around with the smart label, or, you know, super reliable, and while that sounds really good, that means, oh, I'm reliable, so that means I can never be unreliable, and I have to, make sure that I'm the perfect son or the perfect daughter. And so all these labels, whether bad or good, are things that we carry around with us. So just a note on that, you know, now that everybody is adult, you should take a look at some of the labels that you carry with you. You know, for me, I'm the good daughter, and I was saying, well, good daughter means I never let my parents down, whether it was grades or my success or even how much I attend to their needs or how often I take their calls, sometimes at the expense of my own life. And so that was a label I had to re-examine. Okay, I think I am a good daughter, but maybe I can redefine what that means. Expelling the voices in your head is tough. So you start with really thinking, okay, what labels am I walking around with by a stranger or a parent or anybody? And then you have to say, well, do you really believe it? You know, do I think I have a big nose? I don't right now. And then you can challenge it. And is it true? Or is it even important? It doesn't matter what size my nose is. So you should go through and take a look at how, if you think other people are defining you, then you're trying to live up to expectations or trying to cover up for inadequacies that people in and of themselves have given you. Then there's your internal voice, and this is the one, you know, I manage a group of 1,000 engineers, and so I spend a lot of time talking, of course, but I also spend a lot of time listening, and I'm just amazed at what goes through people's minds. So imagine this. Okay, so you had a bad day, and you are driving home, and you made a mistake. And you're driving home and your best friend's in the seat right next to you. So you're driving around and you say to your best friend, I had such a bad day, I made a mistake and I'm really embarrassed. And your friend says, oh my gosh, you made a mistake? That's awful. And you say, yeah, I'm afraid everyone's talking about it. And your best friend says, oh, I'm sure they're talking about it. They're probably at home at dinner right now talking about you. And you say, you know, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And, you know, you try to turn on the radio, but your best friend says, no, let's turn off the radio. Let's talk. Let's focus more on your mistakes. And, you know, first of all, if you really have a best friend, you should pull over and let them out on the side. But the reality is a lot of us carry that voice, that inner voice that continues to harp on it. And it causes you to obsess about the smallest things, and it can snowball and it can spiral. Or you can think about the same thing 100 times, which I would definitely say is not useful. It was things I used to do in my 20s. By the way, you can't see me. I'm much older than that now. But, you know, at this point, I make a mistake, I may think about it, and then I really do let it go. It takes a lot of practice, and we can talk about that when I'm done. But that obsessing, it comes with the perfectionism, you know, why aren't I perfect? And you can tell, you know, you go home and you open the door to hopefully people that love you more than anything in the world, and yet you're eating dinner with them and you're thinking, I made a mistake, or I have a to-do list, or I wonder if I'm getting that email, all in this pursuit of perfection, and you're losing out on time that really matters in your life. Or even if you don't have people to go home to, you go home at night and you try to sleep, and that person on your shoulder is like, don't go to bed, let's think about all those mistakes you made, or let's think about those things you have to do. And it really starts to interfere with everything from sleep, relationships, and of course, how you feel about yourself. So these can be pretty dangerous trends for perfectionism. You know, perfectionism, again, becomes, it's possible in college. We can debate whether it's useful. It has some use, of course, because you can get good jobs if you do very well. But it also has a tremendous amount of downsides. I spend a lot of time on college campuses as well, and the stress that our students feel is truly palpable. I could almost feel it in the room. I went to a Dean's List dinner last week to talk, and they just look, when I told them they didn't have to be perfect, there was almost this collective sigh in the room, like, oh, okay, you know, but you know, 4.0s aren't necessary. I didn't get a 4.0, you know, and I lived through that. So actually, I definitely didn't. I had a 3.3, and I'm just fine, and I did well. And so just kind of listening to that. So it gets harder and harder to be perfect, and there is no way to measure it. And if you are susceptible to listening to how other people think you are doing, then it gets even worse because you'll always let somebody down. There's always somebody that thinks you're not doing what you should because there are only so many hours of the day. You know, my mother doesn't think I call her enough, or my friends don't think I call them enough, or, you know, my seventh boss doesn't think that I've given him the right pitch. And so there's always somebody in your life to do that. So I want to take this opportunity, and I'm glad now I can't hear you, so nobody can shout this out. I'm going to ask you a question, and I know the answer, so that's the bad part. But I'm going to give you a scenario, and I would like you to just write a number down. And that is, I want you to rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 10. And here's the question. How intelligent are you? So I'll give you about 5 seconds to think about that, 1 being not that smart, 10 being super genius, so if you could rate yourself. And since you're all alone, hopefully you've been incredibly honest. And so here's the answer. The answer is 10. And I know that because I'm talking to IEEE. And people say, well, no, I'm not really a 10, but you are, because you have to think, you know, I don't know if any of you have seen the general public before, but all of you are above average on this call. Yet, I would guess that some of you ranked yourself below a 10. And that's because perfectionists have a habit of comparing themselves in every single category to the highest number, you know, to the very best. So I was counseling a very young woman, and she really was, I thought she had self-esteem issues, and I was just talking to her, and I said, well, how smart do you think she is? And she said, you know, I think I'm a 6. And I said, you just got into Georgetown, which is almost impossible to get into. Why do you think you're a 6? And she said, well, my English teacher told me I couldn't write, you know, and I got a C+ in English. And I said, so one teacher told you that you couldn't write and you got a C+, and that makes you a 6. And she said, yes. And I said, well, how athletic do you think you are, and you know, on a scale from 1 to 10? And she said, well, Dad, I think I'm an 8. And I said, well, you were just recruited to the crew team on Georgetown, which is also one of the best teams in the country. Why didn't you give yourself a 10? And she said, because we lost the high school championships. You know, and so someone like me, I'm thinking, you went to the championships. That immediately puts you in the top 1%. And yet, because she's such a perfectionist, she's comparing herself to something I think that doesn't exist. And often, you know, we try to seek perfection in every single category. I want to be the most beautiful. I want to be the most athletic. I want to be the smartest, the thinnest, the person with the best car, the person with the best house. And of course, none of that is actually in one human being, ever. So if you take a look at who you're comparing yourself to, a realistic look, you'll realize that you're comparing yourself, if you are comparing yourself indeed, to many different people, and you're not allowed to do that. You know, if you want to look like somebody, fine, but then you also need their brains, their relationship, you need their whole life. You're not allowed to compare yourself to the best qualities of 50 different people. That's impossible. And no human being is perfect in everything. No human being is perfect, because that's subjective to begin with. But no person has all of those qualities. So take a look at how you rated yourself and think, if you rated yourself less than a 10, who are you comparing yourself to? I would say I want to talk a little bit about the enemies of confidence, because especially we have some young people on the phone, and one of the best things you can do is start to build your confidence, which is not arrogance. Arrogance is essentially It looks like confidence, but it has no merit. Confidence is actually, understanding what you're good at, what you're not, just feeling kind of comfortable in your own skin. I'm going to give you a different definition a little bit later on. But as it turns out, I believe that perfectionism is a huge enemy of self-confidence, because you're always thinking you can do something better. And at some point, when things are good enough, you keep going. It actually causes you to not go and do something. So I'm going to give you an example. And I gave this example when I was talking this summer. But I had this, I've been a manager now. I've been at GE 33 years. I've been a manager for about 28 of them. So I'm pretty experienced. And I had this young man come to my office. It was 5 o'clock. I'd already told my husband I was going to come home early for dinner. But he came and he looked pale and he looked very concerned. And so I said, okay, hold on, come in. I texted my husband, told him I'm going to be late for dinner. Something I think serious has come up. So I close the door, I sit down, I ask him, okay, what's wrong? And he said, okay, it's not good. I said, okay, just take a few deep breaths, tell me what's wrong. And he said, I got a B- on one of my tests. And I said, okay, figuring there was more to the story. And he said, at this point, there's no way I can get an A. And I tell people, he's telling this story to somebody who once got a 23 on my theoretical calculus exam, and I mean 23 out of 100, not 23 out of 25. So his existential life crisis wasn't quite registering, and it turns out it was going to be his only B. He went to Princeton, he had a 4.0, and he was collapsing. And I just, I told him he needs to get a C. Please, try to relax. But what happens is when you're on this roll, why it erodes your self-confidence is eventually if in order to get 100, quote unquote, on things, you're going to have to try things that aren't risky. And you're going to have to try things that are safe and that you can do. And when you do things over and over again, essentially, that you can do, you don't test yourself. And one of the tenets of self-confidence is really understanding additional things that you're good at and additional things that you're not good at. So it turns out that this can really start to erode. My house was perfect 22 years ago. And I loved it that way. I made the bed, even my sink and my faucets were clean, and it was very comfortable for me. And then I had children. And then I'd say when my kids were about 9 and 6 was when I finally decided that having a perfect house was not only impossible, but it had to be something I was going to be comfortable with. And I said that when my kids finally went to college, then I'll again have a perfect house. And letting go of that was such a relief. But boy, but it took a long time. Any of you that have small children understand how difficult that is, and just picking up toys and finding, stepping in goo or whatever it is that they dropped off the dinner table 2 days ago. So all of that is hard. And if you don't make conscious decisions like that, it can be an insidious cycle. What I say about this is I'm a really good mother and I'm a really good worker, but rarely on the same day. The other enemy, I think, of self-confidence, which is wrapped up with perfectionism, is this fear of failure. So I'll tell you another story. I had this young man. He graduated from both Harvard, his undergrad, and Stanford from his graduate degree. So clearly somebody much more book smart than me by far, and just a wonderful human being. And he came in and he said, I have 2 choices of a job. I'm looking at 2 jobs. One of them is this at A, and one of them is B, and they both looked good to me. But I said, I think B is a better choice for you you should grab that one, but, but either one you'll be fine. It's not going to be too bad. So he came back a month later, and he said, okay, I've almost made a decision. So I just stared at him, and I said, what do you mean you've almost made a decision? I don't care what your decision is, but didn't you make it a month ago? And he said, no, I've really been thinking it over, trying to make the perfect decision. Now, that's an example of where he was just afraid to fail, but there's nothing wrong with failing. And one of the big reasons for imperfection is knowing that when you fail, you can succeed. You can get past that. It's inevitable. Life will push you down, or you'll fall down on your own accord. That just happens. You'll do stupid things and you'll have to recover from them, or life will hand you something incredibly unfair and it doesn't matter because you still need to recover from them. But he was so paralyzed that he was going to make the wrong decision when truly neither one would have been wrong. And even if you have a bad job, you know what that teaches you? Okay, maybe I have to pay more attention to who I work for or what I do, but at least I found something I didn't like and I know why I didn't like it. And of course, that's one of the keys to career success, understanding what you don't want to do. You're going to make bad decisions, and it's going to be your fault. And you'll do it again, and you'll be okay. And those are things that you have to learn, and sometimes it takes a crisis to do that. So I do want to talk a little bit about what I think real confidence is, because I used to think it was about being really good at things and knowing you're really good at things. And then after a while I thought, well, it's also knowing what you're not good and feeling comfortable with that. But I don't think that's what it is at all. I think confidence is knowing you can come back from anything. And that's why perfectionists sometimes lack confidence. When I take a look at perfectionists on a piece of paper, if I saw any of your resumes, I would be incredibly, incredibly impressed. So if confidence were just what was on a piece of paper and a list of accomplishments, everybody on this phone would feel confident. But based on my conversations with hundreds and hundreds of engineers, I know that that's not always true. So what you need most is the ability to make a mistake, understand that, things don't last, good times don't last, but bad times don't last, that you're going to make through it, you know how to get yourself out of a jam, and then you're going to move on. And once you know that mistakes are going to happen, it's very freeing. Because when you make a mistake, you're not going to go home and obsess about it. You're just going to say, okay, what's my plan to fix this? So I'll tell you a story I know some of you on the phone have heard, but when my daughter was going off to college, she was in the middle of her senior year, so I think it's about like 6 months before she was going to go off to college. And I told her, I was super excited. I said, I'm going to write a book, and it's going to be for you, and it's going to be all the wisdom and advice from your mother. And she laughed, and she said, no, you're not. So I was very disappointed. And she said, okay, not only that, but you've been giving me advice for 18 years, and you can only give me one piece of advice when you drop me off at college, which is incredibly hard for somebody like me. I'm so glad that I get to speak all the time because it's an outlet since my kids don't want to hear it. So when I dropped her off, and I was crying and hugging her, and she was happy, and so she finally says, okay, you can give me that one piece of advice. And I've been working on it for 6 months, condensing my book into, one sentence. And this is what I told her. I said, don't die. Everything else you can come back from. And I think that's the essence of what getting over perfectionism means. It means understanding, first of all, the first part of that sentence is essential. You can't come back from death, but you can come back from everything else. And some of it is incredibly devastating to mild, but the reality is the human spirit is incredibly strong, and sometimes you need help to get over things, and sometimes you just need to power through, and sometimes you need to put plans. But the more setbacks you have, and the more times that you figure out you can recover, eventually you wake up one day and say, this doesn't need to be perfect. And if I make a mistake, I will figure it out. And when you have that, you'll not only have confidence, but your life essentially changes at its core. You're no longer trying to be perfect for other people. And that truly, truly changes your life. It is good to be imperfect. I think, if I take a look at me, I'm a recovering perfectionist. I think, as I always say, people, admitting it is your first step. But I'd say that in order for me to get there, I really needed something substantial to convince me. And so I've always been on at least I was on an upward trajectory, a very quick route up in engineering, and I was a manager by the time I was 26. And all of those things I talked to you about, where things come crashing in on you and you're overwhelmed by children and a husband and a home and work and all these demands, and then being promoted. And eventually I just got to the point where I just couldn't handle it anymore. And that kind of crisis in your life either cripples you or is a true clarifying moment. And I don't know that I knew going into that crisis how it would turn out, but certainly the hardest year and a half of my life, really trying to figure out what I wanted. And I chose to step off the fast track. I chose to start running instead of, I gave up on my health. I was doing nothing but working or, taking care of my children, and that was it. And I said, if I don't take care of myself, this is just going to get worse. So I decided, to start running, and not perfectly, running slowly and walking and biking poorly, not so much that I fall down, but, enough so that I would get some exercise. And really had to put my life back together because this collision of trying to be perfect in every way caught up with me. And it turns out I'm not alone in that. I hear that story a lot from perfectionists, where they're just so hard on themselves. And if you have reached that point, then that's a decision point. Now, you also need help, I think, to make yourself feel better about dropping some things. But the clarifying moment is understanding what is truly important and what isn't. Making sure the voices you hear in your head are your own, not the obsessing ones, but the ones that are saying, who do I want to be? When I turned 40, and this is, of course, about when this whole thing was going on, I remember, if I think about how I was brought up, my mother, who I absolutely adore, and who not only didn't mean me any malice, but she wanted the absolute best for me, but she raised me to be incredibly cautious. Very, very careful. As a matter of fact, she knew that I was going to be a good driver, but I wasn't allowed to drive at night until I was 21. And, so it was a very careful household. And even to the point where when I left the house, she always asked me if I had tissues, just in case I needed tissues. And that was my upbringing. And when I was 40 and I'm going through all this crisis, I started going through all the labels I had in my head, which, of course, was cautious and careful. And it turns out that I really wasn't like that. I was more impulsive. And my impulsivity actually, it wasn't a dangerous impulsivity, but, I would say yes to jobs. When I think about that person that came to me and said, he was paralyzed, when I was his age, I would have taken it the next day and would have had that job a month earlier than him. So those kind of things helped. But I said, okay, what kind of labels do I want? And so I went for some far-out labels, and one of them was adventurous. And things like I was afraid of heights, so much that when I visited the Eiffel Tower, I only went to that first platform. I stayed in the middle and never looked out. So I then learned to rock climb in my 40s, and I tried water skiing, and that was my first trip to Africa on safari, and I brought my kids when they were, 6 and 9, and I totally changed my life. And I think sometimes when you think about being imperfect, it means you come to a point where this is no longer sustainable. I can't be perfect for the world. I need to pick what I'm really going to be good at. And I pick a couple of things that I know that I want to do really well, but the rest of it is just good enough. And I'm still a work in progress. I still have to work hard. I love watching movies, yet I have many reasons why I don't, because I still have to run, or I have to do this or do that. I have to force myself to relax. But it's a worthwhile journey. So what I wanted to do now is kind of open it up, I think, and I'll actually end on this other slide, but I wanted to open it up for some questions and see if there's a whole lot here, and usually these are a mismatch or a hodgepodge of a lot of different pitches that I do. But do you have any questions?
Nancy, no questions have come in yet, but I am sure that we will get them momentarily. As a reminder, everybody, make sure that you type your questions into that chat pod and direct it at either all attendees or host.
It's not easy to give a web chat. I'm basically talking to the window, and so the window is giving me no reaction.
Well, as a throwback to when you were asking people about their, on a line from 1 to 10 on their intelligence, we did have a few people write in, and they were mostly around the range of 7. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I will tell you that they're absolutely wrong. I mean, this is the IEEE. When I went to the event in New Orleans, I was just struck by how intelligent and well-spoken and successful all of those people were. So I have comments here, so let's see. Very nice, so encouragement, thank you. Someone has a 2-year-old. Oh, my goodness. A 2-year-old and a perfectionist totally can relate. That's a tough spot to do, and you're probably not even sleeping. So a lot of people are just telling me they can relate. Do you have a process? Oops, I hear. Do you have a process of discerning your life? Oh, did your process of discerning your life come from a book? Did you come up with it? Are there other processes? Okay. So I think I probably do read some books, and I'm writing my own as well. But I would say when I was going through tough times, there was one book I really loved. Actually, I just sent it out, and it's called Emotional Alchemy. And it's a book that I revisit. It is by Tara Benet Goleman, who is the wife of Daniel Goleman, who does EQ. And what I liked about this book is it talks about 12 maladaptive behaviors. So behaviors that start off maybe good, but ultimately can help, that they actually kind of destroy you. And one of them is perfectionism. And when I read the book, and I even read about perfectionism, I was in denial that I was a perfectionist. I was one of those people that said, oh, no, it's just that I just have high standards. But that book was incredibly illuminating. I think even like on page 90 or something, it starts with these maladaptive behaviors. And so I think that was a very helpful book for me to read to start with. And then because I'm impulsive, I think that means, again, in a way that leads me to say yes a lot. I get to say yes, yes, yes. I think I've had so many mistakes that I just learned a lot. And plus, I also listen to hundreds of people. My job is managing 1,000 23-year-olds, and something about managing 1,000 23-year-olds gives you a lot of perspective, especially when they start talking to you and telling you your inner feelings. So I think that was, and then are there other processes? Yeah, I do everything, like even to sleep better. One of the things I started doing was listening to books on tape, and because it occupies the same part of the brain that obsesses. I had a real problem with obsessing, like a real problem, apparently, as a lot of my colleagues do as well. And by doing that, I was able to sleep. And even if I wake up in the middle of the night, which was never a problem when I'm young, but if anyone is my age on the call, you know that that can happen. And again, playing a book, not an interesting book, but, you know, I like to listen to history books, but history books at 3 a.m. aren't that interesting. So, you know, that helps me sleep as well. Okay, so I have a GE employee. I saw a description in a webinar. It's really long.
You did receive, we have received a flurry of questions.
Okay, I can't read that, but I'm not a great reader, so I might have to read these afterwards. I'm going to read the shorter ones. When is the quest for perfection perfectly okay? Under what circumstances will it be accepted to seek perfection? Is it ever acceptable to strive for perfection in any particular aspects of your life? Okay, so I think that's a good question. So here's what I would say on that. For me, I do present, but one of the things I put a lot of pressure on myself is an event that I have in February. And it's in front of 550 people in GE. And every vice president from engineering is there, and they're all in the front row. And I try to be inspiring for the other 500 people in the room, but I'm also keenly aware that that is probably the only time each year that the vice presidents will get an impression of me. That's it. So in that particular case, I rewrite that speech. I edit it about 20 times. It was 14 minutes this year. I just watched it. And I practiced it probably 30 times. I don't ever memorize things, but I feel very comfortable with it. And then I always, my slides don't even have words. My slides just have pictures there. And so that is something where, you know, I don't practice to be good. I practice to be, you know, as perfect as I can, because that one matters. But other things just don't. And, you know, I present once or twice a week, so and I have a lot of stories. I mean, a lot of things have happened to me, so I can pull out stories, and I'm just one of those people that can, you know, someone can ask me something and I can do that. So I think most things aren't worth perfection, but you have to do if vice presidents are there and they're watching me, and at the end they're coming up to me and saying, oh, that was amazing. Okay, great. Now I told my husband I can relax until next February. So I don't have to be perfect until next February. So yes, so I think there are occasions when you do have to do. How do you draw the line between confidence and arrogance, as well as confidence and humility? Okay, also I get that question a lot too. Arrogance is really baseless. It is, you know, 21-year-olds that exude what looks like confidence is truly arrogance, right? Because 21-year-olds with other 21-year-olds, sure. But 21-year-olds with 50-year-olds, well, that's questionable. One of the questions, I talk a lot about self-confidence too. So parents are always saying, I wish my kids were more confident. And, you know, why can't I make them more confident? And the answer is you can't. Confidence is earned. So the difference is confidence is earned and arrogance is given. So parents that continually tell their kids how wonderful they are, and eventually they leave and they think, oh my gosh, I really am wonderful, then it's not earned. And so I think those are the big differences. And confidence doesn't, you know, I can say, hey, I think I'm a good presenter. But I also, you mix it with humility, because there are many things I'm terrible at. And, you know, mentioning, you know, you can be both self-deprecating and secure. You know, I know what I'm bad at. I talk often about that to, you know, 23-year-olds. You know, there are things that all of you on the phone are so much better at than me. And so I think kind of keeping that balance. But sometimes people feel like, okay, I'm not showing confidence. I'm afraid I'm going to be arrogant. If you're not confident, it's impossible, you know, or if you're not showing confidence, it's almost impossible if you be arrogant. Arrogance is just something that's given to you. And so I think, you know, that's one of them. Okay, let's see. Oh, my goodness. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
There's a good number coming in. I'm not sure if you're
great.
seeing.
Let me go fast. Yep, so let me try to go fast. Do you have any other criteria for determining if I'm a perfectionist? Well, one, if you're asking, you probably are. But I think, yeah, let me give you a couple of things. One, you're susceptible to, like, if you got a 90 on a test, how would you feel about that? If you got an 80 on a test, how would you feel about that? So that's one thing. Do you find yourself like in a, I don't know how old this person, it might be a student or it might be, somebody that's older, but, if you're sitting at PowerPoint, spending 30 minutes, moving things a centimeter at a time, that could be a sign. If you're obsessing about mistakes you made and you can't move on quickly, then I think that too could be a sign. If you're trying to be perfect in almost every category and you're hard on yourself in every category, then that can be a sign. Are you running to be fast or are you running to be fit? Are you, when you look at yourself, you say, oh, damn, I look good. Or you say, oh my gosh, I can see this one imperfection and I wish that were different. So I think there are probably a lot of ways you could do. I'm sure there's probably even a test online that you could take, but I think those are some of the warning signs. I just don't know many engineers, and I am assuming that the majority of your engineers, I don't know many engineers that aren't. One of the reasons I was a math undergrad and not English, even though I was good at English, I don't even know if that's proper English, but because math had an answer. English felt subjective to me. Maybe you didn't like what I was saying, but math, 2 plus 2 equaled 4, unless you started to get into that neighborhood stuff and that theoretical calculus that I got a 23 on, but, it was well-defined. And so that's probably one thing. How do you balance between producing high-quality work and not worrying about perfection? It's really, this is another pitch I do, which is called, it's basically, that's not work-life balance, but it's really prioritizing, but not by writing everything you have to do. It starts with, what is your manager being measured on? And once you know that, because my manager cares about actually very little about what I do. What is going to go on what's going on Michael's summary at the end? And if I know what's going on in his summary at the end, that's my priority. And so I should show you this picture, but I have a picture, or I have index cards on my wall that show my priority for the year, both personal and professional, and they're on my work wall. So, I have running my half marathon, I'm learning Spanish, I want to read some books, but I also want to have this successful summit. I have some goals on reaching out to diversity candidates. So I'm trying to, so I have that all in one. And then when I get really overwhelmed, I look at the wall and I say, hey, is what I'm doing contributing to that? And one of the big things I find out, I divide it into, it's things that matter, and it's very few. It really is very few. And then there are things that you must do but get no credit. And that's what I think most people spend their time on, things like email, meetings, writing some reports. Some reports are good. And so if you're doing things under the category of must do but get no credit, and you're spending a lot of time on that, that's when you go home. Email I clear it out about 3 times a year. And I tell people, if you really, really need to see me, don't write me an email, or if you do, write me twice. Because I'd rather go home than just do busy work. And so really understanding that, I think, helps. And high quality work, when you only have 3 things that you're being measured on. I do a lot of things, but I'm not being measured on what I'm doing right now. My manager will never know that I've done this, does not care how well I did it, doesn't care how many lives I touch. I mean, that's just the reality, that he's not cold, it's just, he has other things to do. And so, how much time do you spend on those things? Any tips on jump-starting your energy? For instance, I feel like I'm dragging just doing my job, and it's because I'm not passionate about it. But I'm so drained at the end of the day, I don't look for a new job or focus on my real passions. The first thing you want to do is make sure you're not depressed, because I have been there. I have a ton of energy, but not when I was depressed. When I was depressed, I would go home, and that's how I started to realize something was wrong. So I took an online test. I eventually got some help, and that was that year and a half I have. So I feel very compassionate towards people that have that. So that's number one. Number two, if you work, if you're in the Northeast or you're in the North in general, the weather alone can make you feel like you're dragging. But jump-starting your energy, for me, first of all, I would exercise, and don't do it after work. Clearly, you're too tired for that, but I would go running at lunch. I don't like to do it either in the morning or night, and so how I started to get myself out of the doldrums was I started running, and again, slowly, but there is something chemical that happens when, it doesn't have to be running, it can be biking, and I hated running too. I hated it. Now I'm running half marathons. I mean, I couldn't run a mile. All I could say is the first few miles I ran when I was starting this whole process, all I said with every step was, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. Except when I finished, I said, wow, I feel good. So there's a saying in running, the first mile is a lie. So the first mile, you're like, nope, I'm not going to do this. And then the second mile is good. So start off slowly. So assuming you're not depressed or there aren't other circumstances or you're not deprived from sunlight, the next thing I would say is start running, because you actually need energy to look for a job to actually feel passion. That's where it all starts. And then you probably should, you can read a few self-help books or find passion outside of work. If you can't move jobs, then is there something that you would like? Sign up for an exercise class or a yoga class or baseball team or whatever it is. So you have to go, sometimes forcing it. But that's kind of the order. Make sure it's not something, that is psychologically damaging and something not going on, all the way through exercising. And then finally, when you get some of your energy back, do things in the morning. On a Saturday morning, write your resume. This is what I call a yuck list. This is how writing is both a love and a hate of mine. But, on Saturday, I will write for 2.5 hours. And so I just sit there and I don't let myself, you can't eat, you can't drink, you can't go to the bathroom until you sit down. And something about telling yourself that in the morning, for me, makes you do that. Okay, what has been your most stressful decision in work-life balance? It was probably 10 years ago when they told me that I had to find a new job and that they wanted me to move, which is kind of the ultimate work-life balance question. And I knew that my daughter probably wouldn't like that, nor would my husband move, because he loved his job, the one he had. And so for me, I had to pick a job that wasn't on the fast track. And when I did that, I kind of fell off all the high potential lists. A lot happened. And, all of a sudden people were saying, well, she was demoted. And so that was tough. And I'm really glad I did it. I was struggling. I always say ego and happiness were 180 degrees out of phase for me. And for, the first, I'd say, 15, 20 years of my career, I was chasing ego. And then for the last 10, I've been chasing happiness. And so that was the ultimate work-life balance. But, then your ego takes a lot of shots, too, because then all of a sudden you're not, the queen or the king or whatever it is, and you're not that person that's climbing the corporate ladder. So that was tough. Let's see. What suggestions would you give to climb up in a career quickly? Sure. So it does help to like it. No doubt about it, but I give 2 pieces of advice if you're early in your career. The first one is work as hard as you can, and I did that. And you do that not just to get a lot done, but to learn a lot. And I made a lot of mistakes, but I was a fast learner. It doesn't mean I've always made mistakes again. You know how they always say never make, it's okay as long as you never make that mistake again. I always made mistakes, twice or more, or I still do it. I always tell myself, hey, there's a cookie, I can eat just one. And, and then I eat 6 because they're delicious. And then after I finish my 6, I say, oh, that was a mistake, I'll never do that again. And then I do it again. So don't listen to that so much. But as you work really hard, you make mistakes, you learn, and you just get wiser. And wisdom is you just can't read it in the book. And as you get wiser and wiser, yes, data is good, but you get a feel for it. So that's one. And then the other thing is meet 100 people a year. And that means 100 people that know who you are, not you knowing them. And the reason is because networking matters. I have people that ask if I want to work for them in fields that aren't even related, and I think it's just because I know them. So it's tough if you're an introvert, so, maybe that's another seminar, we can talk about how you manage your time, we can manage about, what do you do when you're an introvert, but you do need to know 100 people, and at all levels, always just go 2 levels above. That's the most you need to do. Anything else is just being a kiss up. And then you want to make sure you have a lot of peers, and you want to know somebody in the shop. You want to know people in the union. You want to know people in receiving, sourcing. And as you start to do that, then then you start to be able to solve problems by lifting up the phone versus rolling up your sleeves and necessarily solving every one of them yourself. And that is a really fast way to move up. Okay, how do you draw the line between confidence and arrogance? Okay, I already asked. Okay, that one. I always assumed that growth in a large company like GE would be hard. It's too for women. What would you say? I probably think, I had never worked in anywhere but GE, but I think it's relatively easy. And the reason is because there are lots of jobs. So in engineering, you have 55,000 engineers. That's a lot. And so that means when someone leaves, people are leaving and switching all the time. So there is room to move up. So I think that's good. And then women, just so you know, I hire 50% women. So I hired 50% women in our Edison class last year, all incredibly qualified, wonderful women. And so we're really trying to change the culture even more. Engineering culture developed around the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it worked. We created amazing products, but the culture in most engineering groups has to change in every company. I don't know what other companies are doing, but in our company, we are changing it. And so I think it's a better place for women than it was even when I was going through it. Then I have one more. Have you felt fear of imperfection so strong it made you procrastinate? Ah, yes. How do you avoid freezing up when challenging a project? This is a great question to end with. I think this is the last one I have. Oh, no, it isn't. I have a lot. But anyway, it's probably the last one I have from a time perspective. But yes, as a matter of fact, I think that's why people don't go after things that they dream about. If my life's dream is to write a book and I never start it, that means it's always out there. It's always a possibility. But if I actually write a book and then no one buys it, then my dream is over, right? And so I think I'm going to just take a little drink of water. Hold on. So I do think that leads to procrastination. And because, and I have a lot of speeches that I write, and that means, and I have a lot of people, I'm always getting evaluated in my job. I don't know if you're evaluated every day, but every time I give a presentation, right, I'm evaluated. And so there is that pressure to make sure that I have some good content. So I really do force myself, and I call it yuck. I think I might have described this already, but it's called a yuck day, and we even have it at work. And we declare yucks. It means you have to do it, but you don't want to do it, right? It's not I don't have to do it. I have, like, when I have a speech, I have to write it because I've committed, and I know I have 5 speeches in the next month. So that means I have to write them because I'm going to stand up in front of people and they're expecting something to come out of my mouth. So I have a yuck day. And sometimes it's just getting started. Although getting a speech, I hate every part. I hate 99% of every presentation I do except for the end. I like giving it. But it really is me saying I do silly things like, I know you're hungry, but you can't eat until you do this for half an hour. And I hit my Apple Watch and have 30 minutes, and like, you can sit there or you can actually start doing something. I will close my email because my email sometimes it's not only a distraction and really totally, it's useless, but it doesn't help me get what I'm supposed to do. So again, I wish if I could give you a picture of my goals on my wall, but I literally, my office wall is yellow, and these are purple index cards that literally say, rock climb outside, run half marathon at this speed, have a kick butt summit. I mean, so these are all on my wall. And so when I'm really procrastinating, I look up and say, oh, come get your act together, The other thing you should do, again, I always go back to make sure you're diagnosed, because procrastination is also a symptom of things like ADD. So that is the inability to focus. So some of this may not be your fault. Some of it is, okay, don't want to do it, and it may be imperfection, but some of it may be, I can't focus. So always good, and ADD runs in engineering, or ADHD, so, that's something you also want to keep an eye on, too. Don't always think it's your fault. Sometimes you should talk to a doctor or a psychologist or psychiatrist every once in a while, just to say, check in and go, I think I'm normal, am I? And they'll go, no, you're not. So those are, again, check medical stuff first. Are you tired? But if you're constantly procrastinating, I used to, but I don't anymore. And the reason is because I make commitments and then I tell people I'm going to do things. And once you tell people, you have to. And you can't leave a speech to the end. You just can't. Not when it's in front of 500 people. So, I've changed that too. So there's hope for you. I don't know how old you are, but there's still time for you to get better. But try something silly like deprivation, or turn off. And do not bring your phone to wherever you're trying to get something done. Phones are evil. My phones aren't anywhere near me right now. I don't want to hear. I don't want to see my phone. I think they're evil in general. Not that I don't sleep with one, but anyway. Okay, I think I've run over time. There are.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Gosh,
we did. I received some questions that was directed just to me for you to answer. However, if you are okay with this, I'm happy to send a sheet just with any of the questions that we weren't able to get to today that you can answer as you have availability, and I am happy to send the responses to those who asked them, if that would work for you.
Is it anything quick, only thing quick, because I'm actually going to India, and so I don't know how, but are they quick questions, or? And everyone could, if you haven't heard your question, they can hang up, or I don't know, or.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I can email some questions to you for you to answer when you have availability for time. I mean, some of them were really good. But yeah, I want to make sure that we respect your time. Yeah, no, I'm sure. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's easier for me to answer them now. That's why. See, this is me doing time. So you can always hang up if your questions have been answered, then I can.
Sure. So one that I read that I thought was really good is, do you have any recommendations for dealing with people who have given you labels in the past? Even if you've gotten over the label, it can be difficult to not feel the label when you run into this person again.
Yeah, so that could be a poison person. I'm assuming the label is bad, too. Let's assume that it's not like you're the most fantastic person, because usually that's pretty wonderful to walk into. Poison people are, those are people that bring you back. Unfortunately, whether you change their mind or not is immaterial. It's probably whether you feel that way. I avoid poison people at my age. And by the way, this is my definition of a poison person. You go in and talk to them, and you leave and you feel worse. Or you go in and talk to them, and then you walk out of a meeting or seeing it, and then you go over the dialogue and think, did I say the right thing? And then he said this, and then I said that. Well, that means you don't trust the person. And right? So those people in your lives should be minimized. So that's step one. And then I mean, you could always go up and say, hey, you called me lazy, but I just want you to know I'm not lazy. You can do that. The danger there is they would say, well, yes, you still are, you know, or I don't see that. I think I have people in my life that said things to me, but I will never see them again, ever. So there is no chance for me to work through with them that. So I just have decided over time that, you know, that label was incorrect. So yes, so I guess there's two things, right? You can, or three things. You can avoid them. You can go up and talk to them about it and say, hey, that really hurt my feelings when you did that. That's always good. I have done that before. You hurt me when you said that. Please don't, you know, this is how I see it, and you can work through it. Or you can then just say, you know what, it doesn't matter what that person thinks, and I'm going to have to get over that and work through that issue myself. So avoid, confront, or just take the inner peace route would be my guess.
Okay. And if you have the time, we have 4 more questions that I've received. Again, it's all completely at what you have availability for.
Sure.
One of them is, any advice to high school and college students who are driving for A's and good grades in order to get into college?
Yeah, to get into college? Well, yeah. So when I think about, GE hires from, we have 40, what we call executive schools. So we have relationships with 40 schools, but we hire from like 170. The reality is, I think the book, I don't know what it's called, but it's a Malcolm Gladwell thing, but essentially he did a study that said if you're in the top third, no matter where you are, you're going to be better off than being in the bottom third at the very best school. So my first thing is, you know, what is it? There's a saying, like, college is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. So be careful about going to a school just to look good in other people's eyes, and something where you're not going to be comfortable with. You want to develop as a total human being. The advice I gave to someone, you know, just a few minutes ago is you want to network, you want to figure out who you are. It's a tough time, I think. I wouldn't go back to being in my 20s for anything. It's because and you don't know what you want to do, by the way, and that's perfectly normal too. So yeah, you can strive for A's, but I think, you know, all A's, I'm wary of hiring somebody with a 4.0 at this point, because I'm afraid that they haven't had a life experience where they can show me they can recover. So for what that means, it's just, I think it's hard to translate from I'm in my 50s to somebody who's 18 who thinks that that's important. But here's what I'll tell you. I went to a country school. There were no AP classes. There were no honors classes, and there wasn't even a calculus class. So my first semester at an engineering school, I got a C in calculus, and then and I was valedictorian in my country school, but then I had to figure out how to get an A the next time. I don't know, I came back from it all. Every time I fell down, I figured out a way to get back up, and I think it made me who I am. I think it makes me stronger. So just trying to get all A, get out, live a little. I'm not saying, you still have to follow the adage, don't die, everything else you can come back from. But, please try to have a little fun. If you're not having fun when you're 18, that's not going to get any better by the time you're in your 50s. So I am not impressed with the 4.0. I am impressed, of course, with the 4.0 because, like, wow, that took a lot of work. But it's not necessarily someone I want to work with. I don't want to work with somebody who is so perfect that they couldn't even tolerate my imperfections. So I guess it would be relax a little. If you're going on for your master's, I always say, hey, go to a school that you would like in your undergrad, do really well, and then you can go to a bigger name for your master's degree. So those are a few pieces of advice. We certainly hire hundreds of people a year off colleges, and we hire very few with a 4.0.
The next question I have is, do you have any suggestions for how to deal with obsessive-compulsive planning?
Yeah, so obsessive-compulsive is definitely more of the, a psychological thing. I am familiar with it because we have, some people that I work with have that. you know, it's really a difficult thing, but you definitely need professional help on that. It's, I think it's, to make you feel better, I'll say, you know, it's rare in the general population, but I think it's incredibly, incredibly common in engineering. I see it all the time in my office. And so, you know, so you're normal within your population, and that's good. But you do want help because it really paralyzes you, and it puts you through the ringer. I mean, your mind never stops, and you're doing things over and over again, and you're checking things, and your anxiety level is extremely high. And, you know, it makes me very sad. I mean, again, I know lots of people that have that. It's not just for planning, but it's for other things. And so my suggestion is definitely, you know, get some help. And certainly at least start with reading some books so that you can academically understand what's going on. It's not your fault. It is definitely part of your brain. But, you know, I always say with being really smart is on the, you know, the tail of a normal curve, and along with being in the tail comes with things, you know, you get other things like ADHD and obsessive compulsive and other things. But you also are really smart, right? So there are lots of advantages of who you are, but you don't need to suffer. So getting help would be good.
And one last question before we can let you sign off. How do you deal with a perfectionist boss?
Yeah, that stinks. Well, basically, you ride that one out. You know, that's the other part of being a perfectionist. You know, if you are a perfectionist, think about the pressure that puts on other people. You're not going to change it. You can barely change yourself. I mean, just the cookie example, right? So I can't change myself. So what I would say is do a good job, figure out how long you have to be there. You know, if it's someplace like GE, you know, I've had 17 jobs. So clearly, I've almost quit 3 times, which is not a big deal, right? Everyone wants to quit a job, and I've always stayed because I got a new manager. So 2 of the 3 times were because I'm a manager, because of my manager. So I really get that one. And, you know, figure out how to write it out. If it's really unbearable, you know, you might need to talk to somebody like HR or, but I would say in general, that's probably not sustainable, because a perfectionist boss will drive you in a way that is probably unacceptable for your life. So do what you can, hope they get fired, hope they move on, hope they get not promoted, I guess, and then, or you move on. So, because that's just not going to change. I think, and in the meantime, the problem is I've worked with people like that, and it's really even hard to give great advice, except for, I guess you say, what are your boundaries, and say no, you know, and then you have to accept less than perfect for you because they're holding you to a standard that's unattainable. And so if it's really affecting your life, then figure out what you're willing to do and what you're not. And, you know, what you're not willing to do is stay until 7:30 every night. That's just not, that's not healthy for you. Or you're not willing to come in at 6. So if you're not willing to do that, say, listen, I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to work until 6, but not past that. So there are also boundaries you can put. You know, you can stick up for yourself, but it really depends if this perfectionist is also evil or it's a nice perfectionist. I didn't get enough descriptors to figure out where they fit on that.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy. I really appreciate your time today. I think this was a fantastic webinar. And for everybody who is wondering, this will be available on our archive, which I'll give you the address in a moment. But before we do our ending spiel, do you have anything else you'd like to add, Nancy, before we end?
Listen, I really appreciate, first of all, Diana, you give me the time to talk about this thing. I'll talk about it to anyone who will listen. I really have this desire for people to be happy, and I do think that smart, successful people have a few things that derail them, everything from perfectionism and self-confidence and work-life balance and all those things. So I enjoyed my time in New Orleans. I enjoyed the questions. Thank you so much for asking all the questions. It makes me feel like you were listening, so that's kind of nice. And I'd be very happy not only to do a webinar, but I would love to come and do an in-person presentation for your group anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nancy. Again, we appreciate your time. Everybody, if you would like to access the recording of this, it will be available at our archives at ieeeusa.org/careers/webinars. And we encourage you to sign up and look at our other future webinars, including our monthly government affairs update. The next one will be the 23rd of March. And the following one after that is topics women should avoid at the office on the 24th of March. Thank you very much. Again, thank you, Nancy. And I hope everybody has an enjoyable rest of their day. And I will be ending the webinar now.
Thank you, Diana.